Welcome to Horror Drift Stories. Before we start, tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you like slow, atmospheric horror, don't forget to like and subscribe. And just a small note, you might hear a few ads at the beginning, but after the first 10 minutes, it's completely ad-free. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. Story 1. The first time it happened, I was 6 years old. My mom had taken me to a museum for the afternoon. I remember being excited the whole way there because I loved places like that. Everything felt big and important. There were portraits of famous historical figures hanging on the walls, old uniforms, under glass, polished weapons from another century, and all kinds of things that made me feel like I had stepped into another world. I had fun pointing at everything, asking questions, and running a little too far ahead whenever my mom let me. At one point, we walked into a hallway lined with portraits. Men in old-fashioned coats, military uniforms, stiff collars, and serious expressions stared down from painted frames. I remember walking past them one by one, pointing them out to my mom, even though she was still a few steps behind me. Then I felt it. It was a strange feeling, one I had never had before and could not explain. It was like a hollow space, opened in my stomach. Not pain exactly, but a heavy ache. It felt like hunger, except not the kind that makes you want food. It was deeper than that, more upsetting, almost like my body itself was trying to warn me about something. I slowed down and stared at the portraits. Some of them made the feeling worse. Some of them didn't do anything at all. So I started testing it. I hurried down the corridor, stopping in front of each portrait, waiting for that sinking feeling to show up or not. Dead, 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 I thought, without really knowing why. Some of the faces brought it instantly. Others didn't. Then, near the end of the hallway, there was a newer photo. Not a painting, just a modern staff portrait with a little sign under it. Employee of the Month. The feeling hit me just as hard. I remember panicking. I ran to my mom as soon as she caught up and wrapped myself around her leg, crying and pointing at the picture. "Mom, Mom," I said, "there's a dead man on the wall." She looked at the photo, then back at me, confused. "That's not a dead man," she said. "He works here." "No," I told her, crying harder. "He's dead. He's dead, Mom." She tried to calm me down, but I would not let it go. I knew what I felt. I knew that whatever was happening inside me when I looked at certain people in pictures, it meant something. Later, we found out I was right. The man had died in an accident a couple of days before. That should have been the moment everyone around me took it seriously. Instead, it became the moment my parents started trying to bury it. They told me not to talk about it. They didn't exactly call me a liar, but they treated it like a bad habit, like something embarrassing I needed to stop bringing up. They didn't want me saying things like that in public. They didn't want family hearing about it. They definitely didn't want me pointing at people in photographs and saying they were dead. After a while, I learned to keep it to myself. I started thinking of it as an ugly thing, the kind of thing you hide because it makes other people uncomfortable. But even when I stopped talking about it, it never stopped happening. If I looked at pictures of missing children on milk cartons or in newspaper articles and got that same sinking ache, I knew, even before anyone said it out loud, I knew there would not be a happy ending waiting for them somewhere. Looking back now, I can see how much that ability shaped my life, even when I pretended it didn't. For example, I never hang framed family photos in my house. My walls are covered in abstract art, comic prints, and video game posters. nothing with real people in it. I do not like looking at photographs and wondering whether that feeling will come back. It is unpleasant, even when I am ready for it. It does not matter whether the person is someone from history, a celebrity, a stranger in an old magazine, or someone from a neighbor's family album. Death is death. The feeling is always the same. And the longer I sit with it, the worse it gets. When I was younger, I briefly considered going into law enforcement. Some part of me thought maybe this strange thing I could do might actually be useful, but I never really let myself believe in it fully. The people who knew about it treated it like shameful nonsense, and after enough years of hearing that, you start to absorb it. I spent a long time telling myself I was broken, that I was imagining connections that were not there, that whatever I felt was some weird delusion I should stop feeding. But deep down, I knew. I always knew. In the end, I became an illustrator. When I was a teenager, I discovered that my ability did not work on stylized drawings or exaggerated caricatures. If a portrait was too abstract, too cartoonish, too far from real life, I felt nothing. But realistic images were different. Those still worked. That realization pushed me toward a certain kind of art style. I got very good at semi-realistic Western comic illustration. And in the late 2010s, I built a decent audience with a webcomic. At its peak, I had around 35,000 regular readers. I eventually had to stop updating it when I got a full-time job with a publisher. These days, I work with a small team making a monthly magazine that has been around for decades. It is steady work, good work. I like it. And in a lot of ways, I am lucky. I live in a nice townhouse. I travel for conventions. I get invited to panels. I meet interesting people. I do not lie awake wondering where rent will come from. I have a life I'm proud of, and I do not expect that to change anytime soon. But none of that erased the thing inside me. It is always there, nagging in the background, shaping little choices. I avoid old reruns on television because I do not want to look too closely at the faces and feel that ache all over again. If some 90s sitcom is on and the camera lingers on a smiling actor, my stomach will start whispering before my brain catches up. Dead, dead, dead. About 2 years ago, I was living alone in that townhouse when a family moved into the house across the street. I noticed them one afternoon coming home from work. A moving truck was parked outside, and a man was trying to carry a large box labeled Fragile up the steps, while 2 kids, maybe 8 to 10 years old, ran in and out of the house like they had discovered a castle. He looked overwhelmed, and I had been raised in the Midwest, where helping a neighbor is practically a reflex. "You need a hand there?" I called out. He laughed and admitted that he probably did. I caught the other side of the box, and together we carried it inside. He introduced himself as Carl. His kids were too busy fighting over bedrooms to pay much attention to me. I ended up helping him move a couch, a desk, a bed frame, and a kitchen table before I had to leave. Just before I went, he stopped me in the kitchen and offered me a beer. I am not really a beer person, but refusing would have felt rude. So I said yes. "Appreciate it," he told me. "Really do. It's no problem," I said. "Glad to help." He smiled. "I'll have to tell the missus we've got one of the good ones across the street. She should be here tomorrow. You should come over for dinner." I tried to wave it off, but he insisted. While we stood there talking, he picked up a framed family photo and hung it on the wall. That was when I saw her. Carl, his 2 kids, and his wife were standing together in front of the Grand Canyon, smiling at the camera. She had long brown hair, hazel eyes, and soft round cheeks that looked made for smiling. There was nothing visibly wrong with the picture. But the second I looked at her, the darkness opened up in my stomach. There was no question, no uncertainty. That feeling had followed me my whole life, and it was unmistakable. The woman in the photo was dead. I did not know what expression crossed my face. But Carl noticed something. He looked at me for a second as if he sensed a shift in me, though he did not say anything. We finished our beers, and I left soon after, trying not to think about it too hard. On the walk back home, my mind went in circles. Maybe something had happened to her recently, and he did not know yet. Maybe she was missing. Maybe she was about to die. Maybe I was somehow wrong for the first time in my life. I did not know what to do. In the end, I did nothing. The next day, around 5 in the afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it and found Carl standing there with his wife. She looked just like the woman in the photo. Same smile, same hair, though a little longer, same face, same voice, same living, breathing presence. "Hey there, neighbor," Carl said. "Thanks again for helping yesterday." She shook my hand and introduced herself as Allie. I was so confused that I barely heard the rest of what they said. The feeling had been so strong the day before that I had no doubt at all. Yet here she was, alive in front of me. She and Carl invited me over for dinner right then and there, and before I knew it, I was putting on shoes and following them across the street. They were wonderful hosts. Their kids were loud, but in the harmless way kids usually are. Allie made rigatoni with homemade sauce, and Carl grated fresh Parmesan over the table, like he was trying to impress everyone. I sat at one end of the table with the family photos directly ahead of me. There must have been a dozen on the wall. Carl and Allie bowling, Carl and Allie camping, their wedding photo, family vacations. Some of them had little notes written on the glass in blue Sharpie, "Best day ever," "Memories for life." Every time my eyes landed on Allie in one of those photos, the same feeling came back. Dead, dead, dead. It was so distracting that I ended up eating more than I normally would, just to ground myself. That happens sometimes when the sensation gets too strong. I focus on food because it gives my body something ordinary to do. Allie smiled and said it was nice to see someone with a healthy appetite. Dinner lasted a couple of hours. We talked about work and travel and moving and kids and ordinary life. Carl worked in real estate. Allie did event bookings and car rentals. They seemed normal, warm even. The kind of couple you expect to see hosting neighborhood cookouts. At one point, Allie went upstairs to check on the kids, and Carl leaned toward me a little. "I'm glad she's doing okay," he said quietly. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "She was in a bad accident last year," he said. "Things have been a little off since then." He explained that she had blown a tire taking a turn too fast, gone off the road, and ended up in a river. According to him, it was a miracle she survived at all. A few broken bones, a totaled car, and somehow she came back. I felt cold all over when he said it, because it was the only explanation I had heard so far that felt even close to the shape of what I was seeing, and even then, it did not really explain it. Later that night, just before leaving, I asked if I could take a picture of the two of them. I made it sound casual, like I wanted to remember the evening, or send it to a friend. They smiled and posed without hesitation. Allie hugged Carl, and I snapped the photo. The second I got back to my house, I opened it. I stared at it for a long time. In that photo, both of them were alive. I tested it over and over, covering one with my thumb, then the other, trying to isolate the feeling. Carl was alive. Allie, in that picture, was alive too, but every older photo of her in that house had given me that other feeling. Every single one. That was the night I sat up until 2 in the morning trying to reason through it. I looked at photos of strangers online to confirm that my ability still worked. Alive, dead, alive, dead. Easy. I looked into heart transplants, near-death experiences, people who had technically died and been revived, trying to see whether my ability had some strange loophole. It didn't. It always worked on the person's present state. If they were alive now, even an old photo of them as a child felt alive. If they were dead now, even a smiling picture from years earlier felt dead. By the end of the night, I could only come to one conclusion. I was looking at 2 different women, one alive, one dead. After that, I tried not to think about it too much. They were still basically strangers. Maybe I was missing some important detail. Maybe there was some explanation I had not considered. I told myself not to interfere in something I did not understand. Over time, though, Carl and I became friends. We were both short on close local connections, and it was easy to fall into a routine of small talk, turning into longer conversations. We would run into each other near the grocery store, outside the house, loading cars, taking out trash. Eventually, beers happened. Honest conversations happened. Little by little, he started telling me more. Allie, he said, had changed after the accident. Not in some dramatic movie way, in the small ways that are harder to explain. She would stand in hallways at night staring at nothing. She would drift in and out of conversations. The kids got nervous around her sometimes. She ate differently. They had been vegetarians before, but now she wanted meat constantly. She doesn't sound right when she sings in the shower, he told me once. I know that sounds stupid, but it's true. The more he talked, the less sure he seemed. He loved her. That part was obvious. He was grateful she was alive, but he also carried something heavy behind his eyes whenever he spoke about her. And then I started noticing things too. Whenever I met Allie face to face, she was cheerful, warm, friendly. But every now and then, I would catch her doing something strange, staring too long at nothing, going quiet in the middle of a sentence, standing too still in the driveway like she had forgotten where she was. One late night, I looked out my kitchen window and saw the light on in their kitchen across the street. Allie was standing in her robe, pulling something from the fridge and eating it straight from the package. Not nibbling, not snacking, tearing into it with furious animal urgency. Then she stopped. She looked up. For one terrible second, I thought she could see me through my own lit window. Her cheeks were full, and her eyes looked so dark I could barely make out the white around them. Then she lifted one hand and waved. Not a normal wave, one finger at a time. A few nights later, Carl invited me over again. We were supposed to watch an animated project I had worked on. The kids were upstairs. Carl got up at one point to use the bathroom, leaving me alone in the living room with Allie. She set down her drink on a coaster. Then she stopped moving. Her hand stayed on the glass. Her body leaned slightly forward. Her face pointed ahead, but her eyes slid toward me. "Don't look at me like that," she said. Her voice was lower than usual. Not much lower. Just enough to feel wrong. "I'm sorry," I said. "Are you okay? How can you look at me like that?" she asked. "What do you see?" My eyes moved without thinking, from her to one of the old photos on the wall and back. She noticed. Her smile faded. "You see it, don't you?" she whispered. Before I could answer, Carl came back in, and her smile snapped back into place so fast, it was like watching a mask slide over her face. After that, she stopped pretending with me as much. Whenever nobody else was paying attention, her expression changed. Her shoulders dropped, her head tilted oddly, jerking a little as though she were testing the angle from which she saw the world. She seemed amused that I knew something was wrong, almost playful about it. Then, one night, while I was turning off lights before bed, I felt something off in the kitchen and turned toward the window. Allie was standing outside with her face pressed against the glass. She wore the biggest grin I had ever seen on a human face. I fell backward so hard I knocked dishes off the counter. She tapped the window 4 times, let out a high, horrible cackle, and slipped away into the dark. After that, I started closing all the curtains. I double-checked the locks. I avoided them whenever I could. Still, I kept hearing things around the neighborhood. Missing pets, opened trash bins, broken storage locks, half-eaten birds left in yards. On a few neighborhood notes and flyers, somebody had drawn little smiley faces in blue Sharpie. Then, one morning, I found a half-eaten bird outside my own front door. That was when I decided I had to confront them. I walked across the street furious and ready to finally say something. One of the kids answered the door before I could knock again. The anger drained out of me immediately. "Is your mom or dad home?" I asked. "Mom's out back, Dad's at the store. I said I would come back later." Then he grabbed my sleeve. "Can you come look at something?" he asked. "Please?" I followed him to the kitchen. Through the back glass door, I could see Allie crouched outside on all 4s, making this horrible choking sound over and over, like she was trying to vomit. "She hasn't done that in a long time," the kid said. "It's weird." I told him to talk to his dad. "He knows," the kid said. I asked if she had been like that for long, ever since the accident. Then I told him I would talk to them. "Please don't," he said. "Why not?" That sentence stopped me cold. Before I could ask what he meant, the back door slid open. The kid hurried me out the front before she could see me standing there. After that, I no longer felt safe in my own house. I heard rustling outside at night. Once, someone tried my front doorknob. My mail had blue Sharpie smiley faces on it sometimes. Every time Allie saw me, she turned toward me with frightening certainty, as if she always knew exactly where I was. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? That my dead neighbor wasn't really dead, but somehow also wasn't herself. That she kept smiling at me wrong. That she stood outside my windows at night. Then one night there was a knock at my door. Carl's voice came through when I asked who it was. He said he wanted to apologize for Allie and asked if he could come in. I put a hand on the lock. Something in me screamed not to. So, I left it closed. Through the door, Carl said things had gotten complicated, that they had to make adjustments. At one point, I heard something metallic tap against the door from his side. Something sharp. "It's not up to me," he said finally. "She's got her eye on you. That's something we have to consider." He wanted me to open the door so we could talk. I refused. After a while, he went back across the street. I saw him through the kitchen window. In one hand, he held something I couldn't quite make out. Something metallic. In his pocket, a garbage bag poked out. And from their doorway, Allie watched me. The next morning, I decided I was done. I would either call the police from somewhere else or leave town for a while. My dad had a fishing cabin out west with electricity and Wi-Fi. I could work remotely from there. I went out early, bought supplies, filled the car, and came home only to grab clothes and essentials. I locked the door behind me and hurried into the bedroom. I opened the wardrobe. A hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I jumped back so violently, I nearly choked on my own breath. It was Allie. She had been hiding inside my wardrobe, her dark eyes fixed on me. There was a yellow tinge in them now. Her mouth was hanging open as she panted in quick bursts like a dog. She looked excited. Before I could scream, her other hand clamped around my throat and slammed me back into the wall. Carl stepped into the room from somewhere behind her. "He sees me," Allie hissed. "You promised." "We're not sure he does," Carl said. "We have to know." She loosened her grip just enough for me to speak. "What exactly do you know?" she whispered. I looked at Carl and forced out the truth. "I know she's dead," I said. "And I know that's not Allie anymore." Carl stared at me, then at her. "What does he mean?" he asked. She tried to shut me up immediately, but it was too late. Carl pressed harder. She snapped at him. He had a knife. She wanted it. They started arguing, and I realized in those few frantic moments that they had probably been living on some shared lie for a long time. He wanted answers. She wanted me gone. She slammed my head into the wall hard enough to make my vision flash red. I fell to the floor. They kept arguing above me while I tried to stay conscious. At some point, Carl asked her if there was anything of the real Allie left. She didn't answer. She lunged at him. That was when her body seemed to shift. Not all at once, but enough for the illusion to fail. Her jaw extended wrong. Her movements turned jerky and predatory. They fought. She bit him in the leg. He kicked her off. I called emergency services from the floor with trembling hands, barely able to speak. By the time my vision cleared again, the woman in my kitchen was no longer pretending to be a normal person. Her face was wrong. Her hair had spread like a mane. She ripped open packages of raw meat from my fridge and stuffed them into her mouth like an animal. Carl crouched next to me, holding his bleeding leg. He still wanted to know what I meant. I told him again. She died in the accident. He looked at me, then at her, and finally nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're just right." Then he dragged her away from the fridge, lured her toward the front door with something he threw outside, and shut the door behind them. The last thing I heard from him was what sounded like an apology. By the time police arrived, the family was gone. They took their car. They left fake paperwork. Before disappearing, they set a fire to cover their trail. The whole thing was written off as a violent home invasion connected to identity fraud and arson. I got stitches in my head and spent a month off work recovering. Later, they found out that some of the names Carl and Allie had used belonged to people who were already dead. That was all the explanation I ever got. I still don't know exactly what Allie became or what had climbed out of that river wearing her body. I only know that the woman in the old photos was dead. The woman in the new photos was alive. And whatever stood in my house that day was neither one in any comforting sense. I still have that dinner photo on my phone, and when I look at it now, I can feel it clearly. Carl is alive, and so is Allie. Story 2. Hey guys, my name is Brittany, and this happened when I went camping in the woods with my 5 best friends: Priscilla, Kaylee, Jessica, Rebecca, and Nikki. We were always together, always loud, always laughing, always talking over each other, and always making fun of somebody. At school, we were one of those friend groups that felt impossible to separate. If one of us was somewhere, the other 5 were usually not far behind. We loved gossip, selfies, music, stupid jokes, and talking about boys way more than we probably should have. At the time, all of us were completely obsessed with the same band. 2 3, or not to, 3. We talked about them constantly. We argued over which one was cutest. We posted edits, watched every clip we could find, and acted like our lives depended on getting tickets if they ever came close to our area. Looking back, it all feels childish now. But at the time, it was everything. The camping trip was supposed to be fun. That was the whole point. We wanted a few days away from parents, school stress, drama, and all the usual noise of life. I had been to that area before when I was younger, back before my dad cheated on my mom and everything in our house started feeling broken. So when the others asked if I knew any place we could go, I told them about a campsite in the woods that I remembered from years earlier. It wasn't fancy, but it was private, and that sounded perfect to us. We packed up food, blankets, drinks, makeup, chargers, hair ties, too many clothes, and probably not enough common sense, then drove out there together. By the time we got close, everyone was already getting annoyed and restless. Priscilla kept complaining that she hadn't downloaded enough music, and she said she needed to fall asleep listening to Pierre's voice, or she would literally die. Jessica laughed at her and said she was way too obsessed. Then Priscilla said she couldn't help it because Pierre was perfect. That started another argument about which band member was the hottest. I said I liked Shay the most. Kaylee said William was the full package. Nikki made some dirty joke. Rebecca rolled her eyes at all of us and said the map looked old and asked if we were even going the right way. I told her yes, because I knew the trail, even if it had been years. She looked doubtful, but she followed me anyway. That was just how we were with each other. Nobody talked nicely for very long. Every sentence turned into teasing, insults, laughing, or some new piece of gossip. Rebecca checked her phone and started reading messages out loud. Nikki accused her of being dramatic. Rebecca accused Nikki of loving her family drama too much. Nikki said at least her family was interesting. Someone brought up Rebecca's dad, giving everyone Starbucks money and movie money all the time. And that somehow turned into another joke. It was loud and dumb and normal. And if I had known what that night would become, I think I would have paid more attention to that part. I would have tried harder to enjoy it. When we reached the first campsite, I recognized it right away. It looked a little worse than I remembered, but it still had that same familiar feeling. I took a couple of pictures, because of course I did, and then we started unloading everything. We planned to stay for 3 days, which felt wild and exciting. I remember thinking that, when I got back home, I was absolutely going to need a spa day after sleeping outside for that long. We started setting up our things and talking about food. I asked Kaylee for the matches because I wanted to get the fire ready. At almost the same time, Priscilla suddenly got excited because her phone picked up service. She was so relieved that she could finally check her messages and listen to music. Then, just seconds later, her mood completely changed. She saw a photo online of her boyfriend Matt standing next to some girl named Gertrude, and she immediately started crying. With Priscilla, everything was always the end of the world. She was convinced that one picture meant he had cheated on her already. Jessica put an arm around her and tried to calm her down, but that only led to more gossip about who had slept with who had broken up because of what, and which girl had a reputation for ruining relationships. Even then, with all of us together in the woods, the conversation somehow drifted back to school drama. I had just asked if someone brought ketchup when I noticed movement deeper in the trees. It was small and quick, but it caught my eye right away. I stopped talking and stared into the forest. The others were still arguing, but I told them I thought I had seen something. Nikki said it was probably a rabbit, because forests had lots of rabbits. and she had learned that from a documentary. Priscilla actually stopped crying long enough to ask if she needed a documentary to know that. I kept staring, because whatever I had seen looked too big to be a rabbit. Then I saw it again. Just for a second. Behind a bush, two eyes were looking at me. Not animal eyes. Human eyes. I froze, and the second I stepped back, whatever it was, turned and ran. The others finally noticed I was serious and asked me what I saw. I said I thought it might have been a person. That immediately led to jokes about creeps, rapists, and Nikki's uncle still being in prison, because even in a bad moment, my friends could not stop acting like idiots. Kaylee, for some reason, announced the number of registered sex offenders in Southern California, like she had been studying for a test. Priscilla yelled at her and asked why she knew that. Kaylee said you could never be too prepared, and Jessica asked if she was preparing for rape jeopardy. I should have laughed, but by then I had already stepped closer to the bush where I had seen the eyes. That was when I found the tracks. At first, I thought I was looking at animal prints, but they didn't make sense. There were marks from hands and feet, like something had been moving on all fours, almost galloping away from us. There were 3 separate sets. I followed them only a little way before I found a deer lying in the brush with its stomach ripped open. The flesh was torn apart in a messy, brutal way. Flies were already all around it. I called the others over, and of course Kaylee came running because she wanted to see it for herself. She acted disgusted, but also wanted a picture for social media. Rebecca asked if the app she used even allowed gore anymore. Kaylee said if not, she would put it somewhere else. Jessica asked if I had seen the bear that probably did it. I said I thought I had seen one of them, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen a person. Jessica said a person would never do something like that because people had, in her words, sophistication. Even now, that sentence sounds stupid in my head. Priscilla took one look at the deer and immediately said we were not sleeping near that. She was done. No debate. She said she was not going to lie down in a place that smelled like death and attracted bugs and wild animals. Kaylee complained and said the next site was only a short distance away. Jessica stared at her and reminded her that 20 feet was not a football field. I agreed with Priscilla, though, because even if the dead deer didn't bother me, the thought of whatever had killed it coming back definitely did. Nikki added one of the weirdest comments of the entire trip, saying birds might use the deer's intestines as nesting material. That was enough to make even Kaylee change her mind. So we packed everything back up and moved. We walked another 15 minutes before choosing a new spot. Once we got there, things started feeling normal again. We set up the tents, threw our stuff around, sat on bags and logs, drank a little, scrolled through our phones, and talked for hours. The mood recovered fast. Like it always did, we were good at distracting ourselves. Once night fell, we made a fire, and it really did look beautiful. The light made everything around us glow orange, and, for a while, it felt exactly like the trip we had wanted. We joked around, roasted food, and nearly watched Priscilla set her own hair on fire because she leaned too close to the flames. If the night had ended there, it would have become one of those stories we laughed about for years. But then Jessica said she needed to go to the bathroom. Nikki offered to go with her, and Jessica turned that into another joke, asking if Nikki wanted to stare at her while she peed. Nikki, who had always had a thing for Jessica, whether she fully admitted it or not, bit her lip and gave her a look that made all of us laugh. Jessica blew her a kiss and walked off into the darkness with her foam light. We stayed by the fire for maybe 3 minutes, maybe less. Then we heard her scream. Right after that came a sound I still don't know how to describe properly. It was wet and tearing and heavy, like claws dragging through mud and flesh at the same time. I grabbed my flashlight. The others stood up so fast they almost knocked things over. We all ran in the direction Jessica had gone, pushing through branches and brush, calling her name. When we found her, she was on the ground, unconscious. There was blood on the back of her head where she must have fallen against a rock. Standing near her were 3 figures. At first, all I could tell was that they looked human. They were crouched strangely, wearing tight, ripped clothes that clung to their bodies like damaged stage outfits. When our lights hit them, they turned toward us. Their mouths hung open too wide. Their skin looked wrong in the glare. Their eyes were tiny points, fixed on us without blinking. For 1 second, all 6 of us just stared. Then we recognized them. Somehow, unbelievably, stupidly, impossibly, we thought it was the band. We actually screamed their names. We really believed it, even with Jessica bleeding on the ground, and these 3 figures looking half dead and feral. Some stupid part of our brains still went straight to excitement. There they were, or at least they looked enough like them for our minds to accept it. Shay, Pierre, and William, the boys from 2-3 Hornot 2. 3, standing in the woods in ruined clothes, staring at us like animals. They moved closer in shaky, awkward steps. One of them croaked that their plane had crashed. Another said they were starving. Their voices sounded rough and broken, but we barely cared. We were too shocked and thrilled to think clearly. Kaylee immediately offered them hot dogs. Rebecca and Nikki lifted Jessica and carried her back toward camp. Priscilla grabbed Pierre's arm like she had won the lottery. Kaylee clung to William. I walked close to Shay, still feeling like I was dreaming. Even with everything strange about them, even with the smell coming off them, even with the dead look in their faces, we let them follow us right back to the fire. That is the part that still makes me sick when I think about it. We were so obsessed, so foolish, so blinded by what we wanted to see, that we ignored every warning sign in front of us. Back at camp, we sat them down by the fire and started talking at them all at once. We asked about the tour. We asked what had happened. We asked if they needed anything, but they barely answered. They just kept saying they were hungry. Kaylee handed them hot dogs, and instead of cooking them, they snatched the meat and tore into it immediately, swallowing it 2 or 3 at a time. It should have scared us. It should have snapped us out of whatever fantasy we were in. But somehow, it didn't. We were nervous, yes, but also excited. We kept trying to make sense of them in a normal way. Then William grabbed Kaylee's wrist. He looked at her and said, very slowly, that he wanted her. Instead of being alarmed, Kaylee blushed like this was her dream coming true. She took his hand and led him into one of the tents. Priscilla made some bitter joke about her being easy. Then, Nikki suggested we play Spin the Bottle. Even now, writing that makes me feel insane. Jessica was unconscious behind us. There were 3 strange men at our fire, eating raw hot dogs like wild animals, and we still acted like it was a sleepover. I spun first, and before it even mattered where the bottle landed, Nikki leaned over and kissed me hard. Everyone laughed. Somewhere behind us, from inside the tent, we could hear Kaylee making soft sounds, and that only made things feel even more unreal. Then Rebecca spun the bottle, and it landed on Pierre. Priscilla got upset immediately because Pierre was her favorite, but Rebecca only laughed and pulled him toward her tent. Priscilla shouted after them, Nikki chased after Priscilla when she stormed off crying. And then, suddenly, I was sitting alone beside the fire with Shay. I tried to talk to him. I asked what he was like off stage, who he really was, what he was like when he wasn't performing for fans. He didn't answer the way a person would. He just stared at me with those empty eyes. I asked again who the real him was. After a long pause, he said only one word, hungry. Then he leaned toward me. For a second, even then, I thought he might kiss me. That is how deep my stupidity went. But as his face came closer, his mouth opened wider and wider, far past what looked human, and inside were rows of sharp teeth stained dark with blood. Before he could reach me, Priscilla came charging back toward the tents, screaming that she could not take this anymore. I jumped away from Shay and followed her with Nikki right behind me. Priscilla yanked open Rebecca's tent. Rebecca was inside, dead or almost dead, lying in blood. Her throat had been torn open. Pierre was crouched over her body, ripping into her chest and eating her. I can still hear the sound of his teeth breaking through her ribs. He turned and looked at us with his face covered in blood. Priscilla tried to say his name. She sounded confused more than terrified, like she still couldn't accept what she was seeing. Then he launched at her. He bit into the side of her head and tore a piece away. She dropped instantly, and he started feeding on her too. Nikki and I screamed and stumbled backward. We turned and saw Shay on top of Jessica's body near the fire. He had ripped off one of her arms and was chewing on it like an animal with a bone. Her body was twisted and still. I started yelling for Kaylee. We ran to the tent she had taken William into and tore it open. Kaylee was alive, but only barely. She was naked on the floor of the tent, drowning in blood, crying and shaking while William fed on her body. Her face was wet with tears. She looked at us and begged for help. William turned toward us with pieces of her still in his mouth. He growled and said, in that same broken voice, that he was still hungry. That was the moment the fantasy finally ended completely. It didn't matter who or what they were monsters, and our friends were dying. Nikki and I ran. I grabbed my phone. Nikki grabbed a piece of burning wood from the fire. Behind us we could hear movement, fast and violent, as at least two of them came after us. We tore through the woods as branches slapped our faces and leaves crushed under our feet. I heard Nikki breathing hard beside me. As we ran, she started using the burning wood to set fire to dry bushes and low branches. Maybe to slow them down, maybe because panic made her wild, maybe because it was the only weapon she had. Small flames began spreading behind us. We kept running deeper into the woods. I could hear crashing sounds behind us, and sometimes I thought I heard breathing. That was too close. Nikki started wheezing badly. The dark was thick under the trees, and the ground was uneven. Then she tripped over a root and fell hard. I stopped and turned, but she screamed at me to keep going. She told me to get out. She tried to say something else. Maybe that she loved me, maybe just my name. But before she could finish, the sounds behind us reached her. I ran. I hate myself for that part, but I ran. I did not look back. I kept moving until my legs felt numb and my lungs burned. I don't know how long it took, but eventually I reached the road. A truck driver found me and picked me up. He asked what happened, why I was covered in dirt and cuts and blood. But I couldn't explain anything. I could barely even speak. When we got into town, I went straight to the police. I told them there had been an animal attack in the woods. I said, maybe bears. I knew if I told them the truth, they would never believe me. They sent people out there, But by the time they searched the area, the fire had spread through enough of the woods to destroy almost everything around the campsite. They found no trace of the band, no trace of what had chased us, and no real proof of what had happened. Maybe they found remains. Maybe they didn't. Nobody ever told me much. What I know is that my friends never came home. I never went back into those woods after that night. I also never listened to 2, 3 Hornot 2, 3 again without feeling sick. Sometimes I still see their posters online, or hear people mention them, or catch one of their songs somewhere by accident. Every time my stomach turns. I don't know what we saw that night. I don't know if it was really them. Part of me says it couldn't have been, that it must have been something else wearing their faces, borrowing their shapes, using our obsession against us. But another part of me thinks the truth might be worse if it really was them. I honestly do not know which possibility scares me more. What I do know is that we went into those woods as 6 girls laughing about music, boys, and stupid drama. And I was the only one who came out. People always say, never meet your heroes. Most of the time they mean it as a joke, like your favorite singer might turn out to be rude, or your favorite actor might disappoint you in person. But after that night, those words mean something else to me. Sometimes the thing you worship is not what you think it is. Sometimes the face you trust can hide something starving. Sometimes the thing you want most in the world is the thing that destroys you the second it gets close enough to touch. And that is why I stay away from the woods now, why I do not follow bands anymore, and why I still wake up some nights hearing my friends laughing around that fire, just before the screaming started. Story 3. I moved into the old Victorian house on Mercer Street last October, just before the weather turned cold. The moment I told people in town the address, they all reacted the same way. They smiled, but their eyes changed. It was the kind of look that made it clear they knew something they did not want to say out loud. I told myself it was just the usual small-town superstition. Old houses always attract stories, and old neighborhoods always have people who want to believe every rumor they hear. The first week in the house was completely normal, or at least normal enough for a place that old. It was cold and drafty in places. The floors creaked when I walked across them. The pipes knocked inside the walls. At night, the whole place seemed to settle into itself, with slow groans and little cracking sounds, as if the house were shifting in its sleep. I had lived in older places before, and I knew they made noise. I kept telling myself that was all this was. Just age, just wood shrinking in the cold, just an old structure doing what old structures do. Then, I found the tapes. It happened while I was working in the second bedroom. One section of the floor had warped upward badly, and I decided I would fix it before winter got worse. I was pulling up part of a loose board with a crowbar when I hit something hollow beneath the floor. The sound was different from the solid thud of wood. It was deeper, emptier. I pulled back more carefully, lifted another piece, and found a small wooden box tucked beneath the subfloor. It was old and dusty, with a metal latch that had rusted almost shut. I remember kneeling there on the floor, holding it in both hands, already feeling that strange mix of curiosity and unease that comes when you find something hidden in a house. It felt personal, like I had discovered something I was not supposed to see. But of course I opened it anyway. Inside were 7 cassette tapes. Each one had a label, and each label was written in the same cramped handwriting. There were no names, no titles, no explanations. Just dates. The earliest one was from 1987. The most recent was from 2003. I recognized that year immediately, because it was the same year the previous owner of the house, a man named Harold Vess, had disappeared. I sat there for a while with the tapes spread out in front of me, trying to decide what to do. The smartest thing probably would have been to put them back in the box, close the floor, and pretend I had never found them. But people are rarely as sensible as they imagine they would be. Once something is put in front of you, once a mystery opens itself even a little, it becomes hard to walk away. I dug through some unpacked boxes until I found an old cassette player I had kept for no real reason. I remember feeling almost stupid while I cleaned it off and checked if it still worked. There was a part of me that thought the tapes would probably be boring. Maybe old family recordings, maybe notes about repairs, maybe music. Anything ordinary would have been a relief. The first tape was mostly static. At first I thought it might be damaged beyond use, because all I could hear was that dry hiss and crackle filling the room. But underneath it, faint and uneven, there was a voice, a man's voice. Harold's, I assume now. He was talking, but so softly and so constantly that I could not make out the words at first. I turned the volume up and leaned close to the machine. He was counting, just numbers, one after another, over and over again. There was no explanation, no pause, no greeting to the tape, nothing to tell me why he was doing it. He was just counting in a steady rhythm. Not fast, not slow. The pacing of it bothered me immediately. It almost sounded like breathing. It rose and fell with that same pattern, so that after a few minutes it began to feel less like a person counting and more like a body trying to keep itself under control. I listened much longer than I meant to. The tape went on like that for what felt like forever. Then, close to the 40-minute mark, the counting stopped. There was silence. Not the empty silence of a room with nothing in it, but the kind that feels occupied. The kind that makes you realize you've been holding your breath. I was just about to switch it off when Harold spoke again, and this time his voice was clear. It's getting closer to the door every night. I move the door, it finds the door. Then the tape went back to static. I stopped it immediately. I wish I could say I laughed it off. I wish I could say I rolled my eyes and decided Harold had simply been unwell. That would have been the reasonable reaction. But something in the way he said it got under my skin. There was no drama in his voice, no attempt to sound frightening, no madness I could point to and dismiss. He sounded tired, matter of fact, like a man describing a problem that had become part of his daily routine. That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the night. I move the door. It finds the door. My bedroom has 3 doors. One to the hallway, one to the bathroom, and one to the closet. I had never thought much about them before, but that night I could not stop looking at them. I lay in bed with the blankets pulled up, staring from one to the next in the dark. Every time the house creaked, my eyes snapped open wider. Every little shift of old wood sounded deliberate. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I had let an old recording get into my head. Still, I did not sleep properly. I drifted in and out until dawn, and every time I woke, I checked the doors again. Over the next few days, I listened to 2 more tapes. I told myself I was doing it because I wanted context. I thought maybe if I heard enough, the whole thing would become less frightening. Maybe Harold was recording some strange sleep disorder. Maybe he was paranoid. Maybe there was an explanation on one of the tapes that would make all of it simple and ordinary. That is how I justified pressing play again. Tape 2 was worse, not because anything dramatic happened, but because Harold sounded more afraid. He was still counting in places, but now he would stop and whisper things I couldn't always understand. Sometimes he seemed to be listening to something on the other side of the room. Once, very faintly, I heard him say, "No, not that one." Another time he muttered, "I know where you were last night." There was a damp shakiness in his breathing that made me imagine him sitting alone with the recorder in his lap, staring at some dark doorway just beyond the reach of the light. By tape 3, he had stopped sleeping in the bedroom altogether. I know that because the sounds on the recording changed, and one of them was a cabinet hinge in the kitchen that still makes the exact same squeak today. The first time I heard it on the tape, I froze. It was such a small thing, but it made the whole recording feel immediate, real. That squeak was in my house now. The same one, the same kitchen, the same voice speaking in the same rooms I had been walking through every day. Harold was whispering throughout most of tape 3. He said he had learned that if he whispered, it took longer for the thing to locate him each night. That was the exact word he used. Locate. Not hear, not notice. Locate. That choice of word frightened me more than anything else he had said. It suggested a process, a hunt. It suggested that whatever he was talking about did not simply wander. It searched, it adjusted, it learned. And for some reason, whispering slowed it down. I remember sitting at the kitchen table after that tape ended, staring at the recorder and feeling completely foolish for being scared of an old man's voice on an old cassette. But my hands were shaking. I kept noticing things in the house that I had ignored before. The narrow stretch of hallway that always seemed darker than it should have been. The way sound carried strangely between the upstairs rooms. The tiny shifts in temperature near certain walls, as if some parts of the house kept a different kind of cold. Still, I put in tape 4. Tape 4 was different from the others in a way that made me regret listening to it almost immediately. Harold did not speak at all. For 52 minutes there was nearly nothing, just the soft hiss of tape and an occasional barely audible sound I could not place. I almost turned it off several times, but the silence itself became so tense that I kept listening, convinced something was coming. It felt like being trapped in a room with someone who refused to move, knowing they were there even though you could not see them. Then, near the end, I heard it. I still do not know how to describe that sound in a way that feels accurate. The closest I can come is this. It sounded like something learning how to breathe. Not breathing naturally, not the automatic breathing of a person or animal. It sounded practiced, deliberate, as if something had heard humans do it often enough that it was trying to copy the rhythm. Inhale, pause, exhale. But each part was slightly wrong. The timing was off. The depth was wrong. It was too aware of itself, too mechanical and too wet at the same time. Listening to it made my stomach turn so hard I had to stop the tape and step outside into the cold air. I stood on the porch for a long time after that, trying to calm down. Since then, I have not listened to tapes 5, 6, or 7. They are still on my kitchen counter, lined up in a neat row exactly where I left them, and I cannot bring myself to touch them. I also cannot bring myself to throw them away. I know that makes no sense. Every rational part of me knows I should have gotten rid of them the moment the recordings started affecting me. But there is something about them that feels wrong to disturb. Like they are not just objects anymore. Like finishing the sequence or breaking it might both lead to something I do not want. What I can tell you is this. 3 nights ago, I woke up at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. There was no sound that woke me. No dream that I remember. No crash, no voice, no movement. 1 second I was asleep, and the next I was fully awake, staring into the dark. My room was silent. The house was silent. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you begin to imagine sounds inside it. I looked around the room. All 3 doors were shut, exactly as I had left them before going to sleep. At first, that reassured me. Then, I noticed the closet door. The latch on that door has been broken since I moved in. It does not stay closed on its own. It never has. If I pull it shut, it slowly swings open again after a few minutes. I had meant to fix it for weeks, but like most small repairs, I kept putting it off. That night, it was closed all the way. I remember staring at it for what felt like minutes without moving. My brain kept trying to solve it in ordinary ways. Maybe I had finally pushed it hard enough to catch. Maybe the frame had shifted in the cold. Maybe I had imagined the latch was worse than it really was. But none of those explanations felt right. And the longer I looked at the door, the more certain I became that something was wrong. I did not get out of bed to check it. That is the part I am least proud of. But it is true. I just lay there staring at that closed door, too afraid to move, too afraid to even reach for the lamp. I kept listening for footsteps, or breathing, or the sound of the latch moving. But there was nothing. The house remained utterly still. I do not know how long I stayed like that. An hour, maybe more. Eventually, the darkness outside the windows softened toward morning, but I never slept again. I have not slept since. Every time I close my eyes, I think about Harold's voice saying, "It gets closer to the door every night." I think about the way he said he moved the door, and it found the door anyway. I keep wondering what that meant. Was he literally moving doors in the house? Sleeping in different rooms? Blocking entrances? And what exactly was doing the finding? Something outside the room? Something inside the walls? Something already in the house with him, only needing time to work out where he was? The worst part is what happened last night. I was downstairs in the kitchen because I could not stand being in the bedroom anymore. All the lights were on. I had made coffee even though I knew I should not, just because staying awake felt safer than drifting off. The tapes were sitting there on the counter, and I was trying very hard not to look at them. Then I heard it. A soft sound from upstairs. Not a thud, not a creak. Just a slight movement, like a door being tested carefully so it would not make noise. I froze with the mug halfway to my mouth. A few seconds later, I heard the same sound again, then another, 3 times, one for each door in my bedroom. I put the mug down so fast coffee spilled across the counter. I did not even bother to clean it. I grabbed my keys and left the house exactly as I was, with all the lights still on, the front door unlocked, and my phone almost slipping from my hand because I was shaking so badly. I got into my car in the driveway and locked the doors, even though being a few yards away from the house should not have made me feel any safer than being inside it. I sat there for hours, staring at the windows. Nothing moved behind them. No figure crossed past the curtains. No shadow appeared. No light switched off. The house just stood there, bright and silent, and completely ordinary, which somehow made it worse. A normal-looking house has no right to make a person feel that kind of fear. That is where I am now. I am writing this from the car, with every light in the house burning. Dawn is still a while away. I have not gone back inside. I do not know what Harold was documenting on those tapes. I do not know what found him, or if it really found him at all. Maybe he ran. Maybe he lost his mind. Maybe the town knows more than they have ever said. What I do know is that something in that house seems to understand doors. It understands waiting, and I cannot shake the feeling that Harold was never recording for himself. I think he was leaving instructions for the next person who would live there. Only he had become so frightened by the end that he stopped knowing how to explain what he had learned. The most dangerous thought I keep having is that if I really want answers, I need to listen to the last 3 tapes. I know that is a terrible idea. I know it. But sitting here in the driveway, watching that house, and thinking about the closet door closing on its own, I have started to wonder if not knowing is actually worse. Because if Harold was right, then whatever moved through that house learned him room by room, night by night, until it knew exactly where to go. And now there is someone new inside. Someone new, sleeping behind new doors. Someone new, I think, it is finally noticed. Story 4. My wife, Amelia, and I met in high school. Even now, after everything, I still have a hard time understanding how it happened at all. She was the kind of girl everybody noticed the second she walked into a room. She was warm, funny, bright, and full of life in a way that made people gather around her without even thinking about it. She had that easy kind of charm that could make a stranger feel like an old friend in less than a minute. I was the opposite. Quiet, awkward. The kind of person who kept his head down and hoped nobody would ask him anything in class. If I got a second glance from anyone, it usually felt like an accident. But one afternoon, by some miracle I still do not understand, Amelia and I ended up alone together in the school library. It was one of those small moments that should not have mattered as much as it did. I dropped a book. She laughed. I said something stupid. She laughed again, but not in a cruel way. Then she sat down beside me and started talking like it was the most natural thing in the world. After that, everything changed so quickly, it almost felt unreal. We spent more and more time together. A study session turned into long walks. Long walks turned into dinners. Dinners turned into nights where we stayed up too late talking about the future, as if we had all the time in the world. By the time 4 years had passed, we were married. We were young, probably younger than most people would have advised, but at the time, it felt right. Amelia had that effect on me. When she looked at me like I mattered, the whole world started to feel less heavy. We were going to build a life together. That was the plan. A small house someday. Maybe children. Maybe a dog. 1,000 ordinary things that suddenly felt exciting just because we would be sharing them. I remember honestly believing that as long as we had each other, we could handle anything. Then Amelia started getting headaches. At first they seemed minor. She would press 2 fingers to her temple and smile it off. She said it was probably stress, or lack of sleep, or dehydration. Then the nosebleeds started. Not once or twice, but often. Too often. I still remember the first time she tilted her head back over the sink, while I stood there trying not to panic. She kept saying she was fine. She always said she was fine. When we finally got the news, it felt like the room had stopped being real. The doctor spoke in that careful voice doctors use when they know they are destroying somebody's life, and there is no softer way to do it. I cannot remember the exact medical words now. I only remember the meaning. 8 months, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. That was what they were giving her. 8 months. A small sentence that somehow managed to break the world in half. I broke first. I cried harder than I have ever cried in my life. I sobbed in that office until I could barely breathe. I remember my own voice sounding ugly and helpless in the room. The sound of a grown man coming apart in front of strangers. Amelia did not cry. Not then. She sat there quietly, her hands in her lap, with a faraway look in her green eyes, as if she had already stepped partway into a place I could not follow. After that, time changed. Everything in our lives became divided into before and after. I took extended leave from work so I could stay with her as much as possible. If she was at the hospital, I was there. If she was home, I was there. If she wanted to sit in silence, I sat beside her. If she wanted to talk, I listened. I would have done anything. I would have traded years off my own life without hesitation if someone had offered. But life does not bargain with people like that. It just takes. As Amelia got weaker, I began to notice the way her family looked at me. Her father tried to be civil, and her sister did too, but there was something in their faces that curdled whenever they thought I was not looking. I understood it, in a way. There was nowhere for their anger to go. They could not scream at the disease. They could not strike fate in the mouth. So they looked at me, the healthy husband still standing beside her bed, and I could feel the blame hanging there, even if they never said it out loud. It was as if their eyes hissed the same cruel thought every time they passed me. It should have been you. I hated myself for hearing it, because they never actually said those words. But grief can put words into people's silence. It can make you believe the worst thing in the room is true. And maybe part of me thought the same thing anyway. One night, when Amelia and I were lying in bed together, with the television on low in the background, she asked me something we had never really talked about before. We had been together for years by then, but somehow the subject had never come up. Maybe because we were young? Maybe because young people do not really believe death is real until it comes into the room and sits down with them. She turned her head toward me and asked, "Do you think we go on in the afterlife?" The question hit me so hard that for a second I could not breathe. I had never been religious. I was not one of those people who could speak with confidence about heaven, or souls, or what waited after death. I had always lived in that uncertain middle place, where you hope there is more, but you do not know. In that moment, though, none of my real feelings seemed to matter. The love of my life was lying beside me, fading day by day, asking if death was the end. What kind of man would I have been to answer with doubt? So I lied. I told her yes. I told her of course we do. I said I had no doubt in my mind. I told her her light was too bright to ever truly go out, that something like her could not simply vanish. I said it with all the conviction I could fake, praying she would hear comfort instead of fear. She looked at me for a long time after I said it, like she was studying my face for weakness. For a second, I thought she knew I was lying, but then her expression softened. She settled closer against me and said, very quietly, "Good. I'll be waiting for you. I'm sure it'll only feel like a few seconds. There won't be time there. There won't be suffering." I should have left it there. I should have just held her and let that be the end of it. But I was so desperate to make my lie sound real, so desperate to build something comforting for her, that I added to it. I told her that if she got there first, I wanted her to send me a sign. Any sign. I said maybe she could send that old Madonna song she loved, or maybe a canary singing on the porch, or anything at all that would let me know she was all right. Amelia smiled then, a sad little smile that still haunts me because of how gentle it was. "I will," she said. The doctors were wrong about one thing. Amelia lasted longer than they thought she would. Not 8 months. Closer to 10. 10 long months of hospitals, medications, false hope, silent terror, and slow loss. 10 months of watching the strongest, brightest person I had ever known become thinner and weaker, until even lifting a glass of water looked difficult. There is a special kind of cruelty in being forced to watch someone disappear a little at a time. When she finally died, the world did not become dramatic. There was no thunder, no great shift, no music stopping in the background. It was quiet, small, ugly in its simplicity. One moment she was there, and then the next, there was something missing from the room that would never come back. At her funeral, I tried to speak. God knows I tried. I stood up. I looked out at the faces. I opened my mouth, but the words would not come. My chest closed up. My throat locked. I broke down in front of everyone and had to sit back down while her family and friends told story after story about how wonderful she was. They talked about her kindness, her laugh, her energy, the way she made people feel seen. They were all right. Every word was true. And I, her husband, the man who should have known exactly what to say, had nothing. Not because I did not love her enough, but because I loved her too much to fit her into speech. After she was gone, time became thick and strange. Days dragged, nights lasted forever. I went back to work eventually, but I was useless there. My focus was gone. I started avoiding friends because every normal conversation felt offensive somehow. How could people talk about traffic, or television, or office nonsense when Amelia was dead? I began drinking more than I should have. Then more than that. Whiskey at first. Then whatever was easiest to grab. I told myself it helped me sleep, but really it only helped blur the sharpest edges of grief for a few hours at a time. There was a hole inside me after she died. That is the closest description I can give. A deep, hollow emptiness that made everything else feel smaller and further away. I knew, even then, that it would never be filled again. You do not lose someone like Amelia and recover neatly. You just learn how to carry the missing part. The first sign came about 2 months after her death. I was sitting on the porch one evening with a glass of whiskey in my hand, half asleep, half drunk, letting the cool air hit my face. I was drifting off when I saw a flash of movement and jerked awake. A white cat had appeared out of nowhere and was sitting at the bottom step of the porch. Normally, I would have shooed it away. I was in no mood for stray animals, but as I stared at it through the haze of alcohol, something stirred in my memory. That conversation. The one in bed. The promise. I leaned forward slowly, hardly daring to breathe. The cat looked up at me. It had green eyes. For one impossible second, it felt like the world softened. My chest tightened, but not with pain this time. With hope. Real, stupid, desperate hope. The cat's face seemed almost amused, almost warm. I actually smiled. Tears started filling my eyes before I even knew they were coming. Then, something rushed out of the dark. 2 coyotes hit the cat so fast, I barely understood what I was seeing. 1 second it was there, and the next it was a blur of white fur and blood and violent motion. I dropped to my knees and reached out, like I could somehow stop it. But it was over, almost instantly. The sounds were horrible, wet, fast, final. I just knelt there, frozen, staring in horror. Then, one of the coyotes lifted its head and looked at me. It was smiling, not like an animal baring its teeth, not like instinct or hunger. It looked pleased, deliberate, almost mocking. That was the moment the warmth inside me died. 2 weeks later, I had the radio on in my bedroom. Amelia and I used to listen to the radio together all the time, even after phones and streaming made it unnecessary. It was one of those little habits that stayed with us from high school. There was something comforting about not choosing the song, about waiting to hear what came next. That night, I was half asleep again, stretched across the bed with my eyes closed, when I heard Madonna's voice drift out of the speaker. My whole body went still. I wanted to believe. God help me. I wanted to believe. But this time my mind fought harder. It's just the radio, I told myself. Madonna songs play all the time. This means nothing. I closed my eyes and rolled over, trying not to let hope touch me again. Then the music disappeared under a burst of terrible static. It came so suddenly and so loud that I sat straight up in bed. Beneath the static, I heard something else. Screaming, not one voice, but many, or maybe one voice layered over itself until it sounded impossible. I do not have words for how wrong it sounded. It was not like pain I had ever heard from a human throat. It sounded like something trapped in a place. Suffering should not even exist. I stared at the radio, too frightened to move. Then, just as suddenly, the static cleared, and there was only Madonna again, singing softly as if nothing had happened at all. That was the night I truly started to think I was losing my mind. I blamed the alcohol. I blamed grief. I blamed sleep deprivation. I told myself I was falling apart and needed to stop before I destroyed whatever was left of my life. So I unplugged the radio, went down to the kitchen, and poured every bottle I had down the sink. Whiskey, beer, anything with alcohol in it. I stood there listening to it splash away and told myself that was the end of it. Amelia would not have wanted me living like that. Even if she was gone forever, even if there was nothing waiting anywhere, she still would have wanted me to try. The next morning, I shaved. I got a haircut. I put on clean clothes. I went back to work, determined to act like a functioning human being again. For a few hours, it actually seemed possible. My boss even complimented me. I handled calls. I spoke clearly. I drank water instead of whiskey. I ate a snack at my desk. For the first time in a long while, I felt the faintest outline of normal life returning. Not happiness exactly, but steadiness. Then my next call came in. I answered, took a sip of water, and heard a voice so familiar that my entire body reacted before my mind did. "Life is terrible," it whispered, "but death is endless, my love." I spat water everywhere and fell backward in my chair so hard I kicked over the keyboard. My headset ripped free. I scrambled up and stared at the phone, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The voice had been Amelia's. Not similar to hers. Not close. Hers. I grabbed the phone and tried to check the call log, but there was nothing there. No number, no record, no trace that anyone had called at all. After that, whatever strength I had rebuilt collapsed. I bought alcohol again, more than before, enough to keep the edge off almost constantly. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe it makes me pathetic. I do not care anymore, because once you hear the dead speak in the voice of the person you loved most, and once that voice says something like that, something inside you changes. Now I notice cruelty everywhere. In the roadkill on the side of the highway. In the way children cry when they do not yet understand what frightens them. In the look in strangers' faces when they think nobody is watching. In the random ugliness of daily life that most people learn to ignore. It feels like the world has become sharper and meaner since Amelia died, as if whatever sent me those signs wanted to peel away every comforting lie I had left. And the worst part is this: I asked for it. That is what I keep coming back to, especially late at night, when the bottle is half empty and the house is too quiet. I asked Amelia to send me a sign. I was the one who begged for proof that she still existed somewhere. I was the one who named songs and birds, and anything else that might reach across the distance between life and death. I wanted comfort. I wanted hope. Instead, something answered. Maybe it is her. Maybe it is not. Some nights I think Amelia is trying to reach me through something dark and broken, trying to warn me that whatever comes after this life is not peace at all. Other nights I think something else heard my request and decided to play along. Something cruel enough to wear her voice, her memory, her little promises, just to hollow me out even further. I do not know which possibility is worse. All I know is that every sign has come wrapped in suffering. The cat with green eyes, torn apart before I could even stand. The song she loved, buried under screams. Her own voice not comforting me, not telling me she was at peace, but whispering that death is endless. If that really is Amelia, then I lied to her in the worst possible way when she needed me most. I told her there was light waiting, and maybe there is only darkness. I told her suffering would end, and maybe it has not. I told her she would be thriving somewhere beyond all this pain. And if her voice was real, then she is not thriving at all. And if it is not Amelia, if something else is using her to hurt me, then I have invited it into my life with my own grief and my own need. Either way, I am trapped with it now. So, I sit on my porch. I drive home from work. I lie curled up in bed with the radio unplugged and the curtains shut, and I wait for the next sign I was foolish enough to ask for. Every little thing makes me tense. A cat in the yard, a song in a passing car, a voice on the other end of a line. I keep thinking maybe the next sign will be different. Maybe the next one will finally be gentle. Maybe the next one will tell me I was wrong to be afraid. But deep down, I do not believe that anymore. Because if there is one thing I have learned since Amelia died, it is that love does not make the universe kinder. It does not protect you. It does not stop terrible things from finding you. Sometimes it only gives those terrible things a better way to reach inside and tear you apart. And I cannot even say I was not warned. After all, I was the one who leaned into the dark and said, "Send me something." So now, when I hear a sudden song or see movement in the yard, or feel that cold change in the room that tells me I am not alone, I do not pray for peace anymore. I just brace myself, because I asked for a sign from my dead wife. And something, somewhere, has been answering ever since. Story 5. I never meant for any of this to happen. Even now, after everything, I still go back to the same thought. If I had just left the diary alone, if I had laughed at it and closed the bathroom door and gone on with my life, none of this would have happened. I would still have my sister. I would still be free. I would still trust my own mind. Instead, I am writing this from a white padded room, where every day is the same, where doctors smile too much, where they give me pills and ask careful questions, and where the only way to survive is to lie well enough that they think you are getting better. I have lied for years. I have nodded when they wanted me to nod. I have said I understand. I have said I accept what happened. I have said the mirror was only part of a delusion. The lies have helped. They loosened their grip just enough to give me supervised computer access. And now that I have it, there is only one thing I want to do with it. I want to warn you. Do not use the mirror. People think mirrors are simple things. A clean surface, a reflection, light bouncing back. But if you stare into your own eyes long enough, something begins to shift. Most people have felt a little of it without understanding what it was. You look too long, and suddenly your own face starts to feel unfamiliar. Your features stop feeling connected to you. There is a strange little drop in your stomach, like missing a step in the dark. Questions start to rise. Who am I really? Why do I look like this? Why do my eyes seem so separate from me? That is how it starts. That is the edge of it. The first person who ever knew that was my grandmother. After she died, I found one of her old diaries hidden away with some boxes in the attic. She had always been the strange one in the family, the one people smiled about in a careful way. She believed in things, rituals, omens, patterns, dreams. My parents used to dismiss her and say she let stories get into her head. But when I was younger, I loved listening to her. She made the world feel bigger than it looked. In that diary, buried between pages about weather, recipes, old memories, and strange little notes about the neighbors, there was one repeated instruction. It wasn't written once like a joke. It showed up again and again, like something she wanted to make sure she did not forget. Stand before the mirror on a Sunday. Look into your own eyes. Say the phrase 5 times. Mirror, mirror, help me see clearer. When I first read it, I laughed. It sounded like something from a fairy tale, or the beginning of one of those dumb games kids dare each other to play at sleepovers. But something about the way she had written it made it stick with me. She hadn't been joking. I could tell that much. The words were neat, careful, and repeated enough times to feel more like an instruction than a fantasy. So, one Sunday, more than 10 years ago now, I tried it. I stood in the bathroom at my parents' house, facing the mirror over the sink. I looked into my own eyes and waited to feel stupid enough to stop. At first, nothing happened, except that familiar discomfort that comes when you stare at yourself too long. My face already felt a little wrong, slightly separate from me. I felt that faint buzz start up in my stomach, but I pushed ahead. Mirror, mirror, help me see clearer, I said. Nothing. I said it again, then a 4th time. By then, I was embarrassed. My reflection looked ridiculous because I looked ridiculous. I remember thinking that Grandma had probably written it as some private joke to herself, or some little ritual that only worked because she wanted it to. Then I reached the 5th time. That was when the air changed. It didn't become cold exactly. It became sharp, crisp, like breathing outside on a winter morning, except there was no frost, no draft, nothing natural causing it. My skin prickled. The bathroom suddenly felt too still. Even the sounds from outside, birds and distant traffic and movement in the house, seemed to sink away. I looked at myself and realized something was wrong. It was my reflection, but it was not. I don't know how else to say that. The face was mine. Every feature was mine. But there was something sitting behind the eyes that was not me at all. My reflection looked at me with a kind of amusement, almost like it had been waiting for me to catch on. Then it spoke, or rather, a voice came from it. The mouth barely moved right. The sound felt closer to my head than to my ears. Ask, it whispered. My whole body went weak. My arms felt loose and useless at my sides. I should have run. I should have looked away, but dread locked me where I stood. My legs would not move. What? I mumbled. Ask a question. I rubbed my eyes, and the reflection copied me, but not quite in the right way. It was like it knew what the gesture should be, but not why people do it. I felt sick. What are you? I asked. I am you, only I am not, it said. Ask. Even now, I can remember how unnatural that answer felt. It should not have made sense, but somehow it did. I was too scared to challenge it properly. So I asked another question. A stupid one, Something small because my mind could not handle anything bigger. I asked why it had never worked before. "You forgot," it said. "Always on Sundays. Ask." That should have been enough to make me stop. Instead, because fear does not always make people smart, I asked something foolish and ordinary. I had a vacation planned the following week, and in that moment, I could not think of anything else. "Am I going to have a nice vacation next week?" "You will regret it," the voice said. And then it was gone. The bathroom returned all at once. Birds outside. House noise. Light. My reflection was just my reflection again. But my feet hurt so badly I nearly stumbled. It felt like I had been standing in one place for hours, though I knew I hadn't. When I left the bathroom, it was much darker outside than it should have been. I had lost more time than I realized. I told myself I had imagined everything. I had to tell myself that, because the alternative was impossible. Then, a few days later, I got stopped at airport security because of a paperwork problem. It delayed me long enough that I missed my flight. That flight was MH17, the same flight that was shot down over Ukraine. When I realized what had happened, all the excuses I had built fell apart at once. I came home, shaken, pale, and unable to think of anything except the mirror. I stood in front of it that same night and repeated the phrase 5 times. Nothing happened. I tried again the next day. Still nothing. It wasn't until the following Sunday, after staying up all night playing video games, that the buzz returned when I looked into my own eyes. "I told you," the voice said. "Thank God you're back," I blurted out before I could stop myself. "You forgot again. Ask." The relief I felt in that moment scares me now when I think about it. I was not relieved because I had found proof of something supernatural. I was relieved because I wanted answers, and it had them. I told it I needed it to come when I called. It smiled through my reflection. "Then throw them away," it said. I didn't understand at first. Then I did. In my room, hidden in a little box, I kept things. Pills, scraps, stupid little comforts, whatever I used to dull myself when things got hard. I never wrote about that part much. But the mirror knew. It knew without me saying it. "Yes," I whispered, "I'll throw them away." "Good," it said. That night, I snuck outside and threw the box in the trash. My hand resisted all the way to the moment I let go. But I did it. Because the mirror had asked, and because part of me had already started trusting it more than I trusted myself. That was how it pulled me in. Not all at once. Not with dramatic promises or obvious evil. It helped. It warned me about small things. It told me not to answer certain people. It told me someone was watching me when I thought I was invisible. It gave me answers that felt impossible to know, and turned out to be right often enough that I stopped questioning the rest. "Do not respond," it told me once through a small pocket mirror while I sat in class. "To who?" I asked. "The ones outside." That same day, 3 guys at a stand near the mall stopped me and got me into some pointless magazine subscription because I answered too quickly. I should have listened. After that, it became harder and harder to deny that the voice saw things I didn't. It spoke about accidents before they happened. It told me secrets about people. It made strange remarks about governments, wars, plots, and hidden motives behind ordinary events. Sometimes it sounded almost protective. Sometimes it sounded irritated that I could not keep up. Every time it left, my feet hurt worse. Every time it returned, it did so from any reflective surface it could find. Not just the bathroom mirror anymore. Pocket mirrors. dark windows, the back of a spoon once, just for a second. Eventually, it started talking about my sister. She knows, it said one day while I was staring into a small compact mirror in class. No, she doesn't. You lie. To me. To yourself. I asked why it cared. If I leave again, it said, another will come. I need you. You need me. I didn't understand what that meant. I still don't fully understand it now. But I do know that around that time, my sister had started watching me more carefully. One day in the kitchen, she finally confronted me. She told me she loved me. She told me she wanted to help me. She reminded me of our grandmother and asked if I remembered how bad things got toward the end for her. She said I spent hours in front of the bathroom mirror every day and that I needed help. While she hugged me, I pulled the little mirror from my pocket without thinking. Save me, the voice whispered. I looked from my sister's face to my reflection. My sister said, let us help you. And the mirror whispered again, save me. I asked how. Leave it to me. That is where my memory turns ugly. They tell me I killed her. I know what the records say. I know what the doctors say. I know what the court said. They speak carefully around me now, but the truth sits under every conversation. They say I murdered my sister during a psychotic break. They say I was deep in delusion and paranoia. They say I projected intentions onto her and acted in fear. I remember flashes, her face close to mine, my hand holding the mirror, the feeling of the buzz rising from my stomach into my throat, the certainty that something terrible was about to happen if I didn't act, then shouting, then red, then my own reflection smirking at me afterward, calm and satisfied, while the rest of the world screamed. I don't understand how all of it happened. I only know what the mirror still tells me whenever the medication gets lowered enough for me to hear it clearly again. It tells me I did nothing wrong. It tells me she was part of the problem. It tells me the others were coming. It tells me it saved me. That is why I lie to the doctors now. Because if I tell them what I really hear, they take the privileges away and increase the dose until everything becomes soft and numb and unreal. If I lie, they loosen their hold. And if they loosen their hold, I can still catch glimpses of the truth. I know how that sounds. Maybe you think I'm insane. Maybe I am. Maybe this whole thing is just what they say it is. A damaged mind that broke open under stress and grief and old family stories. I have spent years turning that possibility over in my head. I have tried to believe it. I have tried to want the ordinary explanation. But no ordinary explanation changes the feeling I still get if I stare too long into a reflective surface. No ordinary explanation accounts for the way the voice returns the moment the sedatives weaken. No ordinary explanation can make me forget how accurate it was in the beginning, before everything fell apart. So I am not writing this to convince you of my innocence. I am not even writing this to convince you I'm sane. I am writing this because there is one thing I know with complete certainty. The mirror answered, and once it does not really leave. Maybe it sleeps, maybe it waits, maybe it settles into the edges of your own face and learns how you move, how you speak, what frightens you, what you want, what you will trade for just one more answer. But it stays. It waits for the next Sunday, the next long stare, the next weak moment where curiosity outweighs fear. Please understand this part. The danger is not that the mirror lies. The danger is that it tells the truth just often enough to earn your trust. That is how it gets inside you. It helps first. It protects. It warns. It makes you feel chosen, understood, sharper than everyone around you. Then slowly it teaches you to believe it more than the people who love you. And once that happens, once you start choosing the voice over the living, you are already lost. I remember my grandmother differently now. Not as the strange old woman with odd habits and notebooks full of nonsense. I think she knew exactly what was wrong. I think she tried to write it down because she hoped someone, someday, would understand before it was too late. Maybe she failed the same way I did. Maybe she thought she could control it. Maybe that is why everyone talked about her in that careful way, as if saying too much might wake something. I used to pity her. Now I wonder if she was trying to warn me all along. And I ignored the only warning that mattered. So I'll say it clearly as I can. If you ever stand in front of a mirror and feel that strange buzz in your stomach, step away. If your own face starts to feel separate from you, step away. If your reflection seems patient or amused or too interested in you, step away. And whatever you do, no matter how curious you are, no matter what you think you might learn, do not say the words. Do not ask it to help you see clearer, because it will. And once it does, you may never be able to stop seeing it. Story 6. That night was completely ruined from the start. Rain had taken over everything. The roadside signs glowed through the dark, their neon colors spreading across the wet road in long, blurry streaks. My wipers pushed water back and forth across the windshield in a lazy rhythm, and the radio was playing some soft, forgettable filler that barely counted as music. It was just another shift in my less than glamorous life as a rideshare driver. I had only been working in that city for a short time, but I had already learned how things usually went. After 11 at night, most rides were just drunk people needing to get home from bars, clubs, or somebody else's bad decisions. On that particular night, though, the app had gone quiet. Almost no requests, no decent money, nothing worth staying out for. I had already started thinking about calling it a night and driving home when my headlights caught a figure up ahead on the side of the road. It was a girl standing alone in the rain. She was thin, wrapped in a dark hoodie, with the hood pulled low over her face. She lifted one hand and flagged me down. For a second, I just stared at her through the windshield. It was late, the weather was awful, and she was standing by herself on a lonely stretch of road. I figured maybe the app had died on her phone, or maybe she was desperate. Either way, I thought I would take this one last fare, make a little extra money, and then finally head home. She did not look drunk. If anything, she looked strangely calm. Lost, maybe, but not wasted. The only thing that struck me as odd was why she had not booked a ride through the app like everyone else did. Still, I was not about to complain. A cash ride meant no commission, no app cut, just money straight into my pocket. I slowed down, pulled over beside her, and rolled down the window. She did not lean in, or ask how much, or say where she was going. She just opened the back door and got in without a word. That was unusual, sure. But night driving teaches you fast that there are plenty of strange people out there. I tried not to make too much of it. I glanced at her in the mirror and said, "Good evening. Where are we headed?" I could hear the slight sound of her shifting in the back seat, but that was it. Her face was hidden completely by the shadow of the hood. It was like trying to look into a hole. I opened my mouth to repeat myself when she finally spoke. "To the old subdivision, please." The second she said it, my whole body went cold. For a moment, I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, staring into the windshield. The old subdivision. Everyone in town knew what that meant. The Pines. I had only moved there recently, But I had already heard enough stories about that place to know it was not somewhere normal people visited at night. Years earlier, it was supposed to be a big luxury development built right on the edge of the woods. Expensive houses, wide lawns, gated entry, the whole dream. They had almost finished building it too. Then, right before it opened, everything collapsed. Investors vanished. Construction crews walked off. Equipment was abandoned where it sat. And after that, the rumors started. The biggest story was about 6 workers who had disappeared there. Some people said they ran. Some said they got into trouble with the wrong people. But the story locals loved most was that the men had been buried inside one of the unfinished houses, walled up, hidden inside the structure itself. No bodies were ever found, at least not officially, but people claimed you could hear knocking and voices in the walls if you stood close enough at night. I never knew how much of that I believed, but I did know one thing. Nobody with good sense went out to the pines after dark unless they had a reason. And this girl wanted me to take her there in the middle of a storm. I looked at her again in the mirror, though I still could not see her face. "You sure?" I asked. I thought that place was abandoned. She turned her head slightly. I still could not see her eyes, but I felt them on me anyway. It was a horrible feeling, like cold fingers running slowly up the back of my neck. I looked away fast. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm sure. They're waiting for me. Will 200 do?" That snapped me back into myself. $200 was way more than the ride should have cost. Triple, maybe more. And I had made almost nothing that night. The smart part of my brain was still telling me not to do it. But the tired, greedy part was louder. I told myself it could be some weird private event. Maybe teenagers exploring the houses. Maybe a party. Maybe some rich kids doing something stupid. Strange did not always mean dangerous. So I nodded, put the car in gear, and pulled back onto the road. Still, one question would not leave me alone. Why there? I tried making conversation once we got moving. It was mostly for my own comfort. The silence from the back seat felt too thick. "You headed to some kind of party?" I asked. "One of those hidden events or something? Maybe I should come too." "Nothing." I laughed awkwardly and kept going. "Come on, give me something. Why so serious? A pretty girl like you should at least smile once in a while." That got a reaction. She shifted in the back seat and turned a little toward me. Her voice, when it came, had changed. It was no longer quiet in a shy way. It was sharp. "Just drive, please." I shut up immediately. There was something in the way she said it that made my hands tighten on the wheel. It sounded less like a request and more like a warning. After that, I kept my eyes on the road. But every few seconds I checked the mirror without meaning to. At one point, I caught something that made my stomach drop. Her reflection looked wrong. It was blurry, but not in the way wet glass blurs things. It looked as though the shape of her was trembling, smudging, almost vibrating out of place. I jerked my head around to look directly at her, and the moment I did, she looked normal again. Just a girl in a damp hoodie sitting in the back seat. I told myself it had to be the rain on the rear window or the poor light from the road. It had to be. But the explanation did not help much. The farther we got from the city, the worse the road became. Smooth asphalt turned into rough patches, then broken pavement, and eventually dirt full of potholes and mud. The woods on either side grew thicker until the branches hung overhead like claws. It felt less like driving and more like slipping into a tunnel that the night itself was closing around. I reached over and turned up the radio, hoping noise would make me feel better. Instead, all I got was static. No music, no voices. Just a dry hiss that filled the car for 2 seconds before I shut it off again. I glanced back once more, and that was when I finally saw part of her face. A weak streetlight flashed past the side window, at just the right angle, and for a split second, it lit her profile. She did not have a left eye. Where it should have been, there was only a dark, hollow socket. I nearly swerved off the road. A wave of panic shot through me so fast and so hard that it made my fingers go numb. I forced myself to look forward again, my heart hammering in my chest. Maybe it had been an injury, maybe an accident, maybe a birth defect. I told myself not to be an idiot, not to act like someone was a monster just because of how they looked. But deep down, something far older than logic was screaming at me to stop the car and make her get out. A minute later, I tried. "Listen," I said, hating the shake in my own voice. "I might need to drop you a little early. You'll be close enough to walk." She did not move. "Keep driving," she said. I did. By then, my shirt was sticking to my back with sweat, even though the car was cold. After a few more miserable minutes, the trees opened up, and there it was, the pines. Even in the rain and darkness, I knew it right away. Big unfinished houses stood in rows like dead things left where they fell. Their windows were empty black holes. Fences sagged. Roof lines dipped under rot and neglect. Everything looked gray, swollen, and wrong against the stormy sky. The whole place had the feeling of something abandoned too quickly, before life had fully left it. The girl raised one hand from the back seat and pointed. "Here." I pulled over beside the house she had chosen. It looked worse than the others. The siding hung loose in places. The front windows were shattered or missing. The roof sagged badly, and moss clung to every surface. Branches from nearby trees drooped over it so heavily, it looked like the woods were trying to swallow the structure whole. I stared at the house, then back at her. Who could possibly be waiting inside that place? No one. That was the answer. No one living, anyway. She opened the door and stepped out into the rain. Then she leaned toward my half-open window. "Wait for me," she said. I shook my head right away. No, that wasn't part of the deal. Just a few minutes. Then I need the money first. For a long moment, she said nothing. I could feel her looking at me from beneath the hood. Then she reached into her sweatshirt and pulled out a gold chain. She handed it to me and said it was a deposit. Before I could argue, she turned and walked away. She did not hesitate once. She went straight toward the house with a light, steady step and disappeared through the crooked front door. I watched her go, every nerve in my body tightening. The second she was inside, I turned the car around so I could leave fast if I needed to. I locked all the doors. I had heard stories before about drivers being lured into isolated places and robbed. Maybe there were people waiting inside. Maybe the girl was part of something. I kept the engine running and stared at the house while rain tapped against the windshield. Something was wrong. Not just suspicious wrong. Not just dangerous wrong. Wrong in the way a nightmare is wrong. I sat there for several minutes, getting more frightened with each one. At first, I tried telling myself I was overreacting. Then, I stopped trying. The fear was too strong. It was not normal nervousness. It felt primal, deep in the bones. The kind of fear that does not ask questions. It only tells you one thing: run. I checked the time. 10 minutes had passed. If I drove away, I would be leaving a passenger behind. I knew that. But every instinct I had was yelling that staying there any longer was a mistake I might not survive. Screw this, I muttered and reached for the key. The engine died before I could do anything. 1 second it was idling. The next it was silent. I stared at the dashboard, then turned the key. Nothing. No click, no crank, no struggle, just dead silence. I tried again and again, my panic rising with every useless turn. It was as if the car had been drained of life all at once. Finally, I swore, shoved the door open, and stepped out into the rain. The air outside was cold and heavy. A patchy white fog had started creeping over the grass and road, low to the ground like something alive. I popped the hood and used my phone flashlight, but the beam looked weak out there, swallowed too quickly by the dark. I stared at the engine without understanding any of it. I am not a mechanic. I would not have known what to fix, even if something obvious had been wrong. Then I realized something else. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course there wasn't. Cursing under my breath, I looked back at the house again. Not a single light had appeared inside. No phone glow, no flashlight beam. Nothing. It was completely dark. How was she even moving around in there? Then, the screaming started. It tore through the night so suddenly that I actually flinched backward. It was high, thin, and full of pain. Real pain. Human pain. Fear turned into adrenaline. Whatever was wrong out there, whatever I had felt from the moment she got in the car, none of it mattered in that instant. A woman was screaming inside that house. I ran to the trunk, grabbed the first heavy thing my hand found, a tire iron, and sprinted for the porch. The scream came again, louder this time. I burst through the front door so hard it slammed against the wall. The inside smelled of rot, wet wood, and mold. My flashlight beam bounced over peeling wallpaper, fallen plaster, and thick webs. I took one step, and the floor creaked loudly beneath me. "Hey!" I shouted. "Are you okay? Where are you?" No answer came, only the echo of my own voice. Then, I noticed the stains on the wall. Dark patches, smeared and uneven. They looked like old blood. A muffled sound came from below. The basement. Without thinking, I rushed to the basement door, yanked it open, and ran down the stairs. Dust covered everything. The air felt thick. Halfway down, my head started swimming. A dizzy heaviness spread through me, and the beam of my phone light began to wobble. Then the room changed. At first I thought I was blacking out, but the more I stared, the clearer it became. The basement around me no longer looked abandoned. The dust was gone. The walls looked newer. The paint was fresh. The air smelled of sawdust and raw construction instead of rot. Somewhere nearby, something heavy scraped across the floor. Then footsteps. A woman was crying. A man's voice snapped back at her, harsh and angry. "Shut up." I stood frozen on the stairs. A large man stepped into view, broad-shouldered and solid, dragging someone behind him. It was the girl. The same hoodie, the same gold chain, the same body twisting and fighting while he pulled her by the hair across the basement floor. "Hey!" I shouted and lunged toward him. My hand passed straight through his shoulder. I stumbled in shock. That was when I understood. I was not in the present anymore. I was watching something that had already happened. The man threw her to the floor. She tried to crawl away, screaming, and he hit her so hard, her head snapped to the side. He grabbed the gold chain at her throat and tightened it until she choked. Then he pulled a knife. I wanted to shut my eyes, but I could not. He screamed at her to look at him. He raged about how she had not looked at him in the car, had not looked at him when he called her beautiful, had not looked at him at all. His voice was full of wounded rage and cruelty. Then he said he was going to teach her a lesson so she would never look down on men like him again. He forced her face up. He forced one eye open, and then, with slow, terrible purpose, he cut it out. Her scream hit me like a physical blow. Something wet struck the floor. He stepped on it. I have seen bad things in my life. Nothing has ever matched that. Not just because of what he did, but because of how calm he became afterward. He stood there looking down at her while she bled out on the concrete, breathing hard, almost satisfied. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her there, alone in the basement. Silence filled the room again, except for her dying breaths. I stood there unable to move, horrified beyond words. Then a voice whispered directly beside my ear. It was raining that night too. He was a driver. He offered me a ride. He did not ask for much. I spun around. She was standing inches from me. The hood was still up, one eye hidden in shadow, the other side of her face hollow and ruined. The empty socket looked blacker than anything else in the room, and she was smiling, not kindly, not sadly, smiling the way something smiles when it already knows how this ends. I'm not him, I stammered, backing away so fast I nearly fell. I turned and ran for the stairs. I hit the basement door and pounded on it, screaming, but it would not move. It felt sealed shut, like part of the wall itself. I slammed my shoulder into it. Nothing. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, certain. I started begging. I do not even remember exactly what I said. That I did not hurt her. That I was sorry. That I was not the man who killed her. But fear does not care about logic, and neither, apparently, do the dead. Her hand landed on my shoulder. It was so cold it burned. All the strength drained out of me at once. I could not lift my arms. I could not scream again. I could barely breathe. She leaned close, and her breath touched my ear like winter air coming from underground. "Nobody will find you here," she whispered. That should have been the end of my story. Maybe it was, because what happened afterward came to me like something seen through water, broken into pieces. Late that same night, another rideshare driver was on the road. He was young, tired, and ready for his shift to end. Rain tapped against his windshield. The radio was low. Then a news bulletin interrupted the music. Police were still searching for a missing rideshare driver whose car had been found abandoned near the Pines development. There were no signs of a struggle. It was the third disappearance in the area in 6 months. Drivers were being warned not to stop for hitchhikers on that stretch of road. The driver laughed under his breath and turned the volume down. He muttered something about urban legends and how people just needed common sense. Then his headlights caught a figure standing on the shoulder. A girl. Thin, wet, hood pulled low. She raised her hand. The driver slowed, leaned toward the window, and called out for her to get in before she got soaked. And somewhere beyond the sound of the rain, beyond the road and the trees, and the dead houses, waiting in the dark, I think she smiled again.